Hey there, fellow knowledge seekers. Ready for another deep dive.
Always.
Today we're going deep into something, well, pretty personal, actually.
Oh, like what?
The history of sex and sexuality in America.
Interesting.
And trust me, it's way more interesting and relevant than you might think, especially right now.
You're absolutely right, especially with all these laws popping up around online adult content. It's everywhere.
Exactly. 19 states in the U.S. are already on board with this whole age verification thing.
Yeah, and it's not just the US.
Nope, it's spreading worldwide.
The EU's Digital Services Act, Britain's Online Safety Act.
Even Canada and France are getting in on the action.
Feels like everyone suddenly decided the internet needs a good old-fashioned chastity belt.
Speaking of chastity belts, our guide for this deep dive is Rebecca L. Davis's book, Fierce Desires, A New History of Sex and Sexuality in America.
Davis. Great choice.
She's a history professor at the University of Delaware, so yeah, we're in good hands.
Definitely.
Especially as we unpack centuries of this debate. Seriously, centuries.
What I find fascinating is that Davis shows how this isn't just about technology.
Oh, really?
It's about these same anxieties that have been swirling around sex in America for centuries.
Okay, I'm intrigued. So, these age verification laws, what's the big deal?
Well,
I mean, on the surface, keeping explicit content away from minors sounds reasonable.
sure, protecting children is a crucial goal,
Yeah.
absolutely. But the devil is in the details, you know?
What do you mean?
For example, what exactly constitutes sexually explicit materials? That's the question.
Yeah.
These laws often leave that definition incredibly vague.
Vague how?
Like, what's sexually explicit? No one knows. And that raises some concerns about censorship and overreach.
I see, yeah.
And what about the privacy implications?
Oh, yeah, good point. Isn't requiring people to verify their age online kind of creepy?
Exactly.
Imagine uploading your driver's license just to visit a website.
It's like, whoa, hold on a sec.
Yeah.
There are serious concerns about data security and, the potential for abuse.
For sure.
And even with all these measures in place, people are finding ways around them. Remember when Pornhub put up that age verification firewall?
Oh, yeah. That caused quite a stir. Didn't VPN usage just skyrocket after that?
It absolutely did. Shows you how determined people are to access this content.
Yeah.
They'll find ways, even if it means using workarounds that might, compromise their security.
Makes you wonder. Is it really about protecting minors or is something else going on?
That's exactly what Davis argues.
Okay, I'm all ears.
She says to understand this current frenzy, we need to look back, like way back,
Back to when?
at how America has dealt with anxieties about sex throughout its history.
Okay, so let's go back in time then. Where do we start?
Well, one figure Davis highlights is this guy, Anthony Comstock.
Comstock.
Yeah, a 19th century crusader against vice.
Against vice. What's that supposed to mean?
This guy, oh man, he makes today's internet censors look tame.
Really?
Wait, wasn't he the guy who freaked out about Victorian erotica?
Yeah, I think so. That seems almost quaint now.
He did, but his impact.
What about it?
Anything but quaint, let me tell you. Comstock genuinely believed that anything remotely suggestive could corrupt young minds.
Like what? Suggestive how?
Even medical textbooks with anatomical drawings.
Wow, talk about an overactive imagination. But did he actually have any real power?
Oh, he did. This guy, Comstock, managed to get the Comstock Act passed in 1873.
Comstock Act? What's that?
It made it illegal to send obscene materials through the mail.
Obscene? Like what kind of obscene?
We're talking books, pamphlets, even information about contraception.
So he actually succeeded in censoring information about sex and reproductive health.
That's crazy.
It is, and get this, even back then, a lot of people ridiculed Comstock's views.
Yeah, I bet.
But his legacy, man, it's a cautionary tale.
How so?
It shows how moral panic, even if fueled by seemingly absurd claims,
Yeah.
it can have a chilling effect on free speech and access to information.
So this fear of sexual content corrupting young minds, not new.
Not at all. But how did these anxieties evolve? I mean, surely we've moved beyond freaking out about anatomy drawings.
We have, but you see, the targets shifted.
Shifted how?
In the early 20th century, the focus moved towards male sexual deviance.
Deviance, in what sense?
A particular obsession with sadism and homosexuality.
So from Victorian erotica to, anxieties about deviant sexuality.
Exactly.
The goalposts kept moving.
They did.
But that underlying fear that exposure to certain sexual content could be harmful, especially to young people, that stayed.
Precisely. And that brings us to the mid-20th century
Okay.
and the infamous Frederick Wertham.
Wertham, who was that?
He was a psychiatrist,
Okay.
and he wrote this book called Seduction of the Innocent.
Seduction of the Innocent. Sounds intense.
It was. He blamed comic books for everything.
Wait, comic books? Seriously. That seems like a stretch, even for back then.
It does now, but Wortham's book had a huge impact.
Like what?
Ignited widespread panic
About comic books?
about the supposed dangers of comic books. It even led to congressional hearings
No way.
and the creation of the Comics Code Authority.
What's that?
It was a self-censorship system within the comic book industry.
So from anatomy drawings to comic books?
Yep.
Anything remotely suggestive could become a target of moral outrage. It seems like America has this long history of just like overreacting to anything related to sex,
That's a pretty fair assessment, yeah.
right?
And, as we move into the 1970s,
Okay.
this anxiety around pornography, it takes another turn
Oh,
with the rise of the feminist anti-pornography movement.
oh, right, because up until then, it was mostly men leading the charge against pornography. What were the feminists concerned about?
Well, feminist critics of pornography argued that it wasn't just about protecting children or preventing, moral decay.
Okay.
They saw pornography as a tool of patriarchal oppression.
Patriarchal oppression.
Yeah, they argued that it reinforced harmful stereotypes about women and that it could potentially contribute to violence against women.
That makes sense. I mean, the depiction of women in pornography, that's been a subject of intense debate for decades.
It has.
It really has.
And not all feminists agreed on the issue.
Oh, of course not.
But this internal debate within the movement,
Yeah.
it highlighted the complexity of the issue, moving beyond those simplistic notions of good versus bad
Yeah.
and forcing a deeper examination of the power dynamics at play.
So we've gone from Comstock's crusade against vice
Yeah,
to anxieties about male sexual deviance,
right.
and now feminist critiques of patriarchy and violence. It's amazing how this debate has, evolved and yet stayed the same in some ways.
It's this fascinating paradox, and this brings us to the 1980s.
Okay.
And the infamous Meese Commission.
Nice Commission.
It was appointed by President Reagan to investigate the alleged harms of pornography.
I remember hearing about that. Didn't they conclude that pornography caused violence against women?
They did.
Really?
Yeah.
Didn't that cause a lot of controversy?
And that conclusion, it was highly controversial.
Oh, I bet.
Many critics accused the commission of bias and methodological flaws.
Yeah, it seems like that debate about whether viewing pornography actually leads to violence against women has raged on ever since. What's the answer?
Well, Davis points out that it's just not that simple.
What do you mean?
While there are legitimate concerns about the potential harm of violent media, conflating all pornography with violence, it's just misleading and dangerous.
It seems like that conflation has been a recurring theme throughout history. Anything remotely suggestive of sex gets lumped together with the most extreme and harmful content.
Exactly.
Doesn't seem very fair.
And that kind of oversimplification can lead to policies that restrict freedom of expression
Yeah, I see that.
and disproportionately harm marginalized communities.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here, from Victorian anxieties to feminist critiques and the always contentious debate about pornography and violence. But how did all this historical baggage make its way onto the internet?
That's a great question. With the rise of the internet, all those long-standing anxieties about sex and sexuality, they found a new target.
Which is?
Online pornography.
Ah, okay.
And this time, the focus shifted even more towards protecting children.
Right, because suddenly anyone with an internet connection could access this vast library of adult content. That had to be a game changer.
It absolutely was. And while there are legitimate concerns about children accessing inappropriate content online,
Yeah.
it also seems like we're seeing a repeat of those historical patterns of moral panic.
So are we just doomed to repeat the same cycles of fear and censorship?
Not necessarily. What's different now is that we have a much better understanding of human sexuality
Okay.
and the complexities of media influence.
So how do we apply that knowledge to this current debate about online pornography?
Well, Davis argues that instead of relying on outdated assumptions and, knee-jerk reactions,
Yeah.
we need to engage in more nuanced and evidence-based discussions about sex and sexuality.
So less moral panic, more critical thinking.
Exactly.
It feels like we've been going in circles with this whole debate about sex and censorship. It's almost like we're hardwired to just freak out about anything remotely related to sexuality.
It's a good point. Davis actually makes this really compelling argument in her book,
What's that?
that these moral panics, they're deeply embedded in American culture.
Interesting.
They keep popping up time and again.
But they target different forms of expression, right?
Yeah, exactly. But they're always rooted in this fear of the unknown, this uncontrollable power of sexuality.
So how do we break free from these cycles of panic and censorship? How do we have these more nuanced, informed conversations about sex and sexuality, especially in a world where, Like everything seems to get so polarized and politicized.
Well, I think for starters, we need to acknowledge that these conversations are going to be uncomfortable.
Uncomfortable how?
Sex is a loaded topic. It's wrapped up in personal beliefs, cultural norms, and often a whole lot of baggage.
Okay, so lean into the discomfort. What else?
We also need to be willing to listen to different perspectives, even those we might disagree with.
Okay.
The feminist critiques of pornography, for example, challenge the traditional narrative
In what way?
and force people to consider the harms that even seemingly consensual content could perpetuate.
That's a good point.
It's not about shutting down the conversation.
So what is it about?
It's about expanding it, making space for diverse voices and experiences.
And what about the role of education in all of this? It seems like a lot of these anxieties just stem from a lack of understanding about sex and sexuality.
Oh, absolutely. Comprehensive sex education is crucial.
Yeah,
Not just the birds and the bees,
right.
Real, honest conversations about consent, healthy relationships, pleasure, and yes, even pornography.
So instead of trying to shield young people from all things sexual, we should be equipping them with the knowledge and critical thinking skills to navigate this, complex landscape safely and responsibly.
Exactly. It's about empowering them, not censoring them. And it's not just about young people.
It's not.
No, we all need to be more media literate, more critical of the messages we consume,
Yeah, I see that.
more aware of the biases and agendas that shape how sex is represented.
So it's about being informed, engaged, and critical consumers of information. Regardless of our age or background, that seems like a tall order.
It is, but the stakes are high.
How so?
The way we talk about sex, the policies we create around it, these things have real-world consequences for individuals and for society as a whole.
Well said. So if our listeners want to learn more about this fascinating and often fraught history of sex and sexuality in America, where should they go?
Rebecca L. Davis's book, Fierce Desires, A New History of Sex and Sexuality in America, is a fantastic place to start.
Yeah.
She does a phenomenal job of unpacking these complex issues with such clarity and insight.
I couldn't agree more. It's a must-read for anyone who wants to understand how we got to where we are today and what's at stake in this ongoing debate about sex, censorship, and freedom of expression.
Who knows, it might even spark some interesting conversations around your own dinner table.
Well, on that note, we're going to wrap up this deep dive. A huge thank you to Rebecca L. Davis for her incredible work, and to you, dear listeners, for joining us on this journey. If you enjoyed this episode, please do us a favor and like, subscribe, and share it with your friends. We'll be back soon with another deep dive into a topic that's sure to challenge your assumptions and expand your understanding of the world around us. Until then, stay curious.